Hi, I'm Zach. I'm a wildlife ecologist, and I spent about 6 months in the last year studying wolves in Yellowstone National Park in summer and winter. And I hear you all just read an article about wolf reintroduction in Yellowstone. And Mr. Cole asked me to talk to you a little bit about wolf reintroduction and how we collect the data that helps us make discoveries like the article discussed.
All right, so here we have the wolves actually being brought back into Yellowstone in 1995 in those cattle trailers that you see there. And that was a really exciting moment. So, as you read, in 1995, wolves were reintroduced, but there was kind of more than that going on. So, around the same time, starting in 1980s, bears and cougars were actually returning on their own naturally to the park because they had been extirpated as well. And the return of all these predators returned Yellowstone to a relatively pristine state, to how it was before humans, because it now had all of the animals that it had before humans arrived, which makes it really unique in the United States. And so this was a really incredible. So this allowed us to do all of this research in Yellowstone. And so why do we do this research? So So why do we do the research? So first of all, wolves are fascinating animals on their own, and it's really cool to be able to study them. But also, it's Yellowstone has been a really valuable opportunity to study how these animals interact with each other, both predators and prey, in this pristine environment, which has allowed us to understand a lot just about their basic ecology and behavior and how they operate. But it's also helped inform other reintroduction efforts in places throughout the world. So wolves have been reintroduced now in Germany and Netherlands, and a lot of the information that we've learned in Yellowstone has allowed us to reintroduce them in those other places. So we have all these different questions we can ask, and a lot of these came up in the article. So we can ask how many animals there are, so how many wolves, how many elk, how many aspen are there, what are all these animals eating, how are they interacting with each other. But we need the data to answer those questions. So that's where fieldwork comes in. So in order to collect the data, there need to be people like me who are going out all day, every day for months and months at a time, hiking all over the park, collecting the data that then other researchers can use to answer all those questions like we talked about in the article. So now I'm going to talk about some of the field methods that we use to actually collect that data in the field. So one of the big things we use are trail cameras. And those are used a lot for estimating population sizes. So trail cameras are these cameras that you just put up on a tree and leave them there for several months. And they have a motion sensor in them. So anytime an animal walks past, then they take a picture, and we can then use that data. We can see how often certain animals are showing up. So in this case, wolves. And we can there are a bunch of different computer models that will take that information and tell us the population size. So here's a wolf that showed up on one of our trail cameras. And then these next two videos are from cameras that actually, instead of taking pictures when they're triggered, they actually took a video. So those are some incredible videos, and we were very excited when those showed up. But what's really cool about trail cameras is that they tell us about more than just wolves, or whatever animal that we're currently studying. Here's a bear that showed up on one of our cameras. And then this is one of my favorite pictures. This is a puma that showed up on one of our cameras in Yellowstone. And this picture actually was in National Geographic's top 20 wildlife photos in 2016, which is pretty cool. So yeah, even if we're studying this one animal, then we can still collect data on a ton of other animals and then either use that ourselves or give that to other people who might be studying the other animals that show up. So yeah, trail cameras are widely used in a lot of other studies, not just in Yellowstone. So the next thing we'll talk about is scat. And okay, we all know that scat is just poop. Scat is the scientific term for it. And so scat's another really common way of studying animals because it's really interesting and it tells us so much about the animals that we're studying. So first, you can identify the poop and see who made it. So you can see what species are around. You can also dissect it and look for bones and hair and stuff like that and see what the animals are actually eating. And what we were mostly using it for was to collect genetic samples from it because there are skin cells that end up on the outside of the poop. And then we can take those and then we get a genetic sample and that tells us the actual individual. And that's another really common way of estimating population sizes. You can either try to just get a sample from every single member in the population, or if you only get samples from a certain amount of the population, then there are other models that we use, kind of like the trail camera videos, or the trail camera photos that tell us that we can use to estimate the population size. And you can also, since you have this genetic data, you can create these family trees of seeing who's breeding with whom and what the offspring are doing, where they're dispersing to, stuff like that. It's really cool. So far, the two methods we've talked about, scat collection and trail cameras, we don't really need to know where the animals are. Obviously, we need to know generally where they are in an area, but you can just put a trail camera up and leave it there. And when animals walk by, it'll take a picture. And with scat, you can just kind of go out and look for poop in an area you think they might have been hanging out in. So now I'm going to talk about some methods of actually finding the animals. So the first one I'll talk about is a howl survey. So this is really cool. So for these, we go out and we just howl like a wolf. And believe it or not, that actually sounds enough like a wolf howling when we do it that wolves will think that it's another wolf and they'll howl back at us. And once they howl back at us, then we can locate the pack and then we can hike in and maybe we'll just document where they were. Maybe we'll use that information to, once we know where they're hanging out, to be able to collect a ton of poop samples. So, and we're howling with wolves, which is just a really, really cool thing to be doing. So here's a video of me howling first. And then this next one is wolves actually howling back at us. So now that's a way of finding the wolf without really ever being in contact with them. So obviously they know we're there, but they think we're just other wolves. So the next methods I'm going to talk about, they really know that we're there because we're actually putting a collar on them. So how do we collar a wolf? As you can see here, wolves are really big animals. So this one weighed about 100 to 140 pounds. So this is my boss, Doug, in Yellowstone, collaring a wolf. And you can see its head is way bigger than his is. So how do you get a collar on this thing? So we need to sedate them. So you do that either by trapping them in a live trap or by darting them from a helicopter. And in Yellowstone, the way they do it is they chase them with a helicopter, and then they dive in really close to the helicopter, and then they dart them, then land. Once the wolf is sedated, they put the collar on. And unfortunately, I didn't get to participate in any of the collaring here. My bosses did all of that, but it's still really cool. And so there are two different types of collars that we would put on. So we have radio and GPS collars. So first I'll talk about radio collars. So how do we find the wolves? So the radio collars can help us find where they are right now. And we do that by using radio telemetry. So the collars send out a radio signal. It's just kind of a pulse, like beep, beep, beep. And each collar is set to a specific frequency. So we can tune into that frequency because we know which individual has which frequency. So if we're trying to find that individual, then we tune into their frequency. Then we pick up the signal using an antenna, like my friend Annie is doing in this picture. And the beeps are louder or softer depending on, so they're louder when the antenna is pointing directly at the animal, as well as when we're closer to the animal. So we can find them, and then, all right, so we found this animal with radio telemetry. So what do we do next? So we watch them. We watch them through these high-powered scopes, spotting scopes, and with these we can see them from up to a couple miles away, which is really cool. So we can observe their behavior. And so we do things like we watch them hunt and feed. We watch them play with each other. We watch them interact with other packs. We watch them interact with other animals. So here's a video of from the 8 Mile pack in Yellowstone, and it's a bunch of pups playing with one of the adults. So here's a video of some of the. Here's a video of a bunch of pups from the 8 Mile pack in Yellowstone, playing with one of the adults. And so you can see the pups are the ones that are quite a bit smaller than the adults. So they're about 3 months old at this point. They're born sometime in April, and then this video was taken in August. And this video was taken through a spotting scope, and we were about a mile away from the wolves where we were standing. So these are several pups playing with the alpha female, who is the mom of all the pups and the leader of the pack, along with the alpha male. So the alpha pair are the two that breed in every pack, and they do kind of all the decision making in the pack. And the alpha female is actually the one that makes most of the decisions and kind of runs the pack. So this next one, we have a wolf eating an elk carcass, and so we're not exactly sure actually who this wolf is, and we're not sure if she killed the elk or if she just found it. We just found her eating the elk one morning when we showed up. So we talked about radio collars. Those allow us to find the wolves where they are right now. But there's another type of collars, GPS collars, and a lot of the collars that we put out, they'll be radio and GPS. So GPS collars help us figure out where the wolves have been in the past. And those are really helpful because, so it's, you know how your phone is tracking where you are all the time? So the collars kind of doing the exact same thing. So the collar is figuring out where it is. It takes a GPS reading, it sends it up to a satellite, and then we can download points from that satellite onto the computer, and then we look for clusters of points where the wolves were hanging out in one spot for a long time. And when they're hanging out for one spot in a long time, they're probably either sleeping or they're eating. And we're really interested in what the wolves eat. So GPS collars are really cool because they can help us figure that out. So this is a map that we would use. So we make these maps every day, and then these points right here, the 60, 47, 59, 56. So those are all the GPS point clusters where the wolves were hanging out in one spot for a while. And then, so we think those might be a kill, but we need to hike out to them to make sure. So we have our handheld GPS units, which are essentially a phone with Google Maps. Just we take away the phone part of it, and it's just the map. And then we navigate our way out to these points. And a lot of the time, we're not following any roads or paths. We're just out there bushwhacking, and it's really fun. So once we get to the points, we have to determine whether or not it's a kill site. And sometimes it's really obvious. If you've ever seen a dog eating anything, they're just tearing into food. It's really messy. So it's the exact same with wolves. At a lot of these kill sites, we'll find blood everywhere. We'll find hair and bones and limbs just strewn out about all over the place because
it's not just one wolf eating, it's often an entire pack, which could be up to 15 or 20 animals, all just tearing apart this carcass. So yeah, sometimes we get to the points and it's immediately obvious, oh, they killed something here. But other times it's not that obvious. So if they're eating an adult bison or an adult elk or something, then the bones are really big and hard to chew through. Their horns and antlers and have really thick fur that they're not really interested in. But other times, if they've just eaten a calf, which isn't that old, then its bones are really soft, they're really thin, so it's really easy for the wolf to just crunch it up. And wolves have incredibly powerful jaws. So they can crack open a bison bone, but they don't necessarily want to eat that as much. But so for the calves, they'll just eat everything. So a lot of the times when we're at calf kill, everything we find, we can hold in our hands like this. So this picture is everything we found at a kill. So often it'll take a lot of detective work and searching. So what do we do once we know that it's a kill site? So we figure out who they ate, and we identify the species. So here we have an elk on the left, and then a bison on the right, and that's often pretty obvious who they ate because they have very distinctive skulls.
And so sometimes wolves actually kill other carnivores as well. So on the left here is a coyote, and this one actually a cougar ate, but wolves will do that as well. And then on the right here is a bear skull that we found the wolves eating one morning. And that one, so we're pretty sure that the wolves didn't actually kill it. So sometimes they'll just find an animal dead and then they'll start scavenging it. And we're pretty sure that's what happened with the bear. Because the way we can tell is if there's a lot of what looks like pretty fresh blood on the ground, then that means that the animal was bleeding as the wolves were killing it. But if there's not really any blood anywhere, then that probably means that the animal just died, and then the wolves just found it. Here's me holding a bison skull that the Junction Butte pack ate. So once we figure out what species it is, then we also determine the sex of the animal. So whether it was a male or female, we determine how old it is, and we can get a relative age. So we can get an age range based on how worn down their teeth are. But we want to know how old they were for sure. So we'll take a tooth sample. And so teeth actually grow rings just like trees do. So with the tooth sample, we take it back, then we send it off to another lab, and they will take a thin slice of the tooth, and then they'll actually just count the rings, like counting rings on a tree. And then we also take a bone marrow sample by cutting the femur, which is the upper leg bone. So we'll cut that open using a saw, and then and that's cool because it tells us the condition that the animal was in when it died. So the fat in the bone marrow, which is inside the bones, is the very last store of fat that an animal will start using. So If the bone marrow is full of fat, that means the animal was in pretty good condition. But if there's not much fat, then that means that the animal was pretty hungry and starting to starve when the wolves killed it. And all those things, like the sex of the animal, the age of the animal, the body condition, that's really interesting because who the wolves are eating, so both what species they're eating, but also whether they're eating females or males, old or young, starving or healthy, that can change throughout the year. And it's really important to get an idea of that so we know how the wolves are actually affecting these populations. So another thing that we do once we get to the kill site is we see who else was eating. So as the article mentioned, when wolves kill something, it creates a food source for all of these other animals, for birds like ravens and eagles and magpies, and other predators like bears and coyotes and even other wolf packs. And then it also provides food for the microbes and bacteria that live and insects that live in the soil. So it's really cool. It's creating this food source for all these other animals in the ecosystem. So we record what animals were there. Either we see an animal right there. So we're looking for tracks and scat from these other animals just to get an idea of who else was there, who else is using the carcass for food. And something that was really interesting is in the article it mentioned that indigenous people in Yellowstone would follow the wolves by watching for ravens on the kills. So we would actually do that too. If we were walking towards a GPS cluster and we saw a bunch of ravens sitting in a tree right nearby, we knew there was probably a kill that we should be looking for. So that was really cool to see that in the article. So since this is pre-recorded, unfortunately I can't answer any of your questions right now, but hopefully Mr. Cole will be able to answer a lot of the questions you do have. And I also put my email down there if anyone has any other questions about the stuff I've talked about now, or the other research in Yellowstone, or any questions about wildlife ecology, or if anyone's interested in maybe doing some work like this someday. I'd really love to hear if anyone has any questions about that. And I also put the Yellowstone National Park Instagram account on here. It's just at Yellowstone NPS. And they are constantly posting a lot of really cool pictures and videos, both about wolves, but also just about the park in general. And yeah, it's really cool to check that out. And then Yellowstone also has a Facebook page. I believe it's the same handle there, and you can also just search Yellowstone NPS on either Facebook or Instagram.
So hopefully now everyone has a better understanding of how we collect data that leads to discoveries like the article talked about. And I also wanted just to talk a little bit about why I do this work. So I'm really fascinated by these animals, and it's really amazing to learn about them and contribute to all this incredible research that's happening. And it's also more than that. It's a really, really incredible opportunity to be out in nature all day, every day, seeing these animals in their natural habitat. And fieldwork has been some of the best times of my life because I've gotten to experience some truly special moments, like seeing wolves howling 100 feet away from me. And I'm incredibly lucky to be able to do this work that I love so much, and also know that the work is helping these animals that I love. So I'd really encourage you, if you're at all interested, to maybe a few years down the line, look into getting involved with some of this yourself. As I mentioned, please feel free to get in touch with me at any time with any questions you have. I love to talk about this sort of stuff. So thank you so much for having me in your class, and hopefully I'll see some of you out in the field someday.